Dear Chabura, good evening. Kol Torah Kol live as we go through the entire Torah Shabbat with the Rambam in our lead, one Perek a day. And we are about to jump into the first Perek, discussing the inyan of a Sefer Torah. The Rambam is going to begin with the mitzvah. Every Yid has to write a Sefer Torah for himself. And the second additional Sefer Torah that the king has a mitzvah. And from that he's going to enter the dinim of writing a Sefer Torah itself. Let's see it inside Halacha Aleph of Perek Zayin. Mitzvah says, "Say al kol ishvish mi Yisrael." It's a positive commandment for every Yid. Lichtav Sefer Torah la'atzmai to write a Sefer Torah for himself. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, now you would think when the Eibusha says you should write down this song for yourselves, that is referring to just Parshas Hazinu. Zok the Rambam Kolomer. Kizus HaTorah sheyesh bo shirazu. Torah is telling you, write the Eibusha is telling you, write the entire Sefer Torah, which will include this shira. Levisha ein kaisen HaTorah Parshas. It's a davar barur that one is prohibited in writing just separate parshas. And when we say parshas, we mean the Parshas Stuma, Parshas Psucha. They're like paragraphs in the Sefer Torah. And so if the Torah told you to write the Shira, it definitely includes not just the Parsha of Shira, which we don't write independently, rather the entire Torah, which includes the Shira. Even though he inherited from his fathers a Sefer Torah, mitzvah lichtayv mishaloi. There's a separate mitzvah for him to write on his own. Now, if he himself wrote it, it's as great as him receiving it from Har Sinai. However, he does not write. It's not a sefer. He can commission somebody and hire somebody to write a sefer Torah for him. If he edited a sefer Torah, perfected it, was metakin it, it's as if he himself, he made it kosher, he made it modern. It's as if he himself wrote the entire Torah. Now, halacha beis. He has an additional mitzvah to write a separate Sefer Torah with the intention. This is for the king. Yosel Sefer Torah shaholik shuhadit. In addition to the Sefer Torah that he had as a private citizen, as every Yid had to have. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, when he sits on his throne, when he begins his reign, because of late, he should write for himself. Now, his Sefer Torah specifically should be edited from the Sefer Torah which Ezra Sefer wrote, and Sefer HaZorah, the Sefer that was in the Hazorah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, to place in the Luchos HaBris, near the Luchos HaBris in the Aron HaKodesh, Kedei, that all the Shvatim, Moshe Rabbeinu gave every Shevet the Sefer Torah, they should all be Magiah continuously from that Sefer Torah. Now, the one that he had initially as a private citizen, of that one he keeps in his treasury. The one that he has now written as a king, or was written on his behalf after he took on the leadership, the kingdom. That one should not leave him. If he goes out for battle, the Sefer Torah goes with him. He comes back from battle, it still stays with him. He's sitting down for judgments, for meetings. This is with him. Mesev, he sits down to recline and to eat. So then, who kenegdo? He doesn't eat with it, but it's in front of him. Shnamar, as the pasuk says, it's with him, and he should read throughout all the days of his life. Now, lawyer Sefer Torah like what happens if he didn't get around to writing a Sefer Torah before he became king, or like Yeshayahu Melech became a king when he was 7 years old? Okay. So tzarich lichtav acher shemal shnei Sefer Torah. He has to write 2 Sefer Torah when he becomes king. Echad, again, like we said, in this case, there's no first and second. So echad manicha beis gnazav. One of them he chooses to place in his treasury. V'asheni ye'imay tamid, as we described, should be with him continuously. Now, v'lo yaser me'imay elav, the only time it should not be with him is by night. Which is not respectful when he's sleeping. When he goes into a bathhouse, or the bathroom, or to sleep, to rest. Now, halacha dalet. Now we're delving into general halachas pertaining to writing a Sefer Torah. If he wrote a Sefer Torah without scraping in lines on which he's going to write, which makes the writing much more proper. We described that you have 2 options. When you write a Sefer Torah, you could either choose the entire piece of parchment, which means the entire hide, that reaches from the meat of the behema until the here. You obviously cleanse it from both sides, but after that if it's one piece remains, it's called gvil, and the sefer Torah could be written on gvil from the outside on the side of the hair. Or another option is you split the entire hide into two, and the outer layer is called klaf, and then you write it on the outer layer on the side facing the flesh of the behema. This is called a klaf. You could write the sefer Torah on either of them, either on the one unit called gvil, and then it's on the outside, or on the klaf on the inside. However, it has to be uniform. It has to be on one, either gvil or klaf. So the Rambam, if someone's written on the gvil, klaf, apostles, and either in its entirety on the gvil or klaf. The case of Kaisin Sefer Torah. Now the Rambam is going to give rules by which the Sefer Torah, the writing is going to be consistent and beautiful. And when you have a Sefer Torah, it could be beautiful, but if each letter is its own picture, then it's Chinese. Okay, Chinese is also a beautiful language, but every word is like its own world. Sefer Torah. So Zakta Rambam, it should be proper, but it should also look beautiful in the way the oises are. And Yaniach bein kol teva, there should be a uniform set amount between each word, and Rambam is going to describe bein kol teva between each word. He should leave kimloi oiskana, the size of a small letter. Small letter could be a vav, for example. Bein kol shita v'shita, between each line also a consistent amount, kimloi shita, the amount of its own empty line. But how long should the lines be? 30 oisius. Kidei, that should be the amount of space needed to write the word l'mishpachai seichem, which is a 10-letter word, 3 times. Now, this is the width of each column. You shouldn't have the shita. Sorry. Yeah, these columns should not be shorter than this. The reason is you don't want it to look like a note or like a letter. It should look formal. It looks like the margins looks like a proper Torah. And it shouldn't be longer than this. That means it shouldn't be longer than 3 times. What's the reason for not? It shouldn't be longer than 30 days. His eyes shouldn't get lost. When the long lines are too long, he loses track where he's holding. This is a medium size. He doesn't want parsha. We're going to see later on in tomorrow's Rambam that there's a parsha called Stuma, which this parsha, this paragraph, I'll call it, starts in middle of the line, or a parsha psucha, which starts at the beginning of a line. So he wants to hit it right. So he's going to write some parshas, start writing shorter, less space between the letters, or more, or shrink the isis. Don't play around. Try to write a consistent style, consistent spacing. And then what do you do? If you write consistent spacing, you may end up with different letters. So we're going to see that the alignment is taka. It's prime as if it's and it's optimal if it's exactly straight on both sides. But we'll see, you could have it sticking into the margin, and that's going to discuss here, because he just laid the foundation that you shouldn't shorten it to be able to start the parsha proper and to make it so. If he has now at the end, he's holding at the end, towards the end of the line, and he has a word that has 5 letters. So he should not reach a point where he writes the majority of the word, let's say 2 within the line and 3 outside of the line. That doesn't work. In that case, move to the next line. Either you write 3 in the line and 2 already in the margin. If you don't have enough on the line in the top line to write 3 yasis in the line, and the majority of the word will hence be within the paragraph, and only the remainder will be sticking into the margin, then just leave the space open and start from the next line. So evidently, it doesn't look, in Word on the top, you have 3 options. You have that all the margins of both sides, the alignment is full like a block, and then it stretches all the ices. You have on one side is straight, and then moves in a little bit. The Sefer Torah could have that situation, even though we don't in our Sefer Torah because we have a Kabbalah which words to write at the beginning, which words to last. As Ram is going to describe his personal Sefer Torah in a way that it made sense. But in Inyan, you can have indents on the side because, as we said, if it's going to end up being the majority out sticking into the margin, we tell you to start from the next line, so you'll have a little indent there. Halach above. What happens? You reach the end of the line, and now you have an extra word that starts with two oisius, like es, min, kol. So we just said only if there's three letters left, then you should skip to the next line. I would think maybe you should put this whole word on the top, on the line, in the margins, not at the end of the world, because less than three oisius. So the Rambam. You should not place it between the columns, which means in the margin. Just go to the beginning of the next line with this two-lettered word. In middle of the line now, he has a letter like with 10 letters. More or less. You don't have enough to write the entire word inside of the margin, inside of the paragraph itself. In this case, being that it's so many letters, we allow you to write 5 in and 5 off, or half at least. If it's more than 10. If you can't write half on the line in the paragraph, then begin the next line. Now, this halacha zayin begins describing. Let's say you finished a chumash. You finished chumash shmais. You're moving to chumash Vayikra, for example. So maneach ben kol chumash chumash arba shitim pnuyos b'loy ksiva. You leave 4 lines without any writing. Loy pachas loy yoser, not less, not 3, and loy yoser, not 5. V'yaschel hachumash. The beginning of the 5th line. That's where you start writing the new chumash, and it's always going to be like a psucha. From the beginning of the line. Now, when you complete the entire Torah, you have to finish in middle of the line. The last line of Torah has to be in middle of the line. You can't end the Torah by the end of the line, so no one should be able to write. It's like you write a check, you put those X's and a line and zeros, so no one could add any numbers. In the middle of a line, we finish. What happens if we want to finish the last column of Torah? We want to finish at the bottom of the entire Yeriah. Let's say if all the columns reach till the bottom here, we want the last column should also reach here. And in the last line, you did have. So what you need to do is you need to plan. If you see that you have not so much writing left to write and you want to reach the bottom of the Yeriah, you should start, the last shura should be smaller lines. So you mamish fill up the entire line. You don't need to do the mishpachesechem thing of 30 oisius. There's left. There's going to be a whole bunch of empty lines left if you write it the size of the regular lines that you wrote the whole Torah. So you shorten, but you plan that oila. Start from the beginning. From the beginning of the column. And you don't finish again the last line. It should be the words which are the last words of Torah should be on the last line of this column, but ended in middle of the line, not by the end. There are certain oisies in Torah that have to be written big, certain ones that have to be written small. Okay, we know Vayikra has a small aleph, or Shema, we have from the mezuzah, we have Shin and the Ayin are big, but I can tell you there are other ones. We have Kabbalah about Shalom in Parshas Pinchas has a line over there in the middle, the emptiness. So these things, these Kabbals, the person should be careful. Over oisi is Hanekudos. We have some oisis that have a nekuda on top of it, like Haniglos Lano Anistaris Lashem Alekeno. Haniglos over there, they have dots on top. Or but oisis Sham Tzurasam. And Ambam's times they had certain oisius that the Kabbalah they wrote them slightly different. Again, they didn't change it from the way we see it. It had the tzuras ois, but had an extra. For example, the fei they had something called lefufos that the pei would go not just once and it would continue twirling in. It was still kosher. We don't do it today. You could see it in all ancient libraries. I've seen such a sefer Torah. It's called lefufos. Kigoyna pain lefufos. Or va'oisius akumais, there were certain letters that they wrote with certain squiggles. Kumai sheitiko, I'll say from Ishmael Pish, as they had handed down from Sefer to Sefer. V'yizoyer betagim of minyanom. Should be very careful with the tagim, as we said on the Ois Shatnez gets. Yes, Ois Yeshal Tagecha. There's some that have only one tag. Yes, Ois Yeshal Shiva, 7 tagin. The Chol tagin. All these crowns. Kitsura Zayin, they're like the shape of a Zayin, little wiggle, like with a dot on top and then a thin line. Dakin, Kichut Asai, they're thin like a hair. Now, halacha test. All these things we have just now mentioned, the Oisis Lefufois and the Tagin and Oisis Ktanis and Oisis Derlis, they are for mitzvah and amufchar, for the mitzvah to be in its ideal way. If you changed in this way of making the Torah beautiful, for example, the spacing you didn't do exactly as you changed the amount of tagging because the colors is called tikkun. However, the oisis themselves, the letters, are written properly. Or he brought the lines closer together, didn't leave a full line between each line. Or you distanced them more. Or you made them longer than 30 years, or shorter. As long as you did not make any letters touching, that means they're all muk of vil. Every letter is surrounded with the white of the parchment. You didn't add any letters, you didn't diminish and take down any letters. You didn't change any surah ois. They have the surah of the ois, a child that's not the smartest or knows a little bit of reading would right away recognize which ois it is. You didn't change the way that you start the parshas with the correct indents, as we'll describe in tomorrow's Rambam. Harez Sefer Kosher. The Sefer Torah is kosher. You can use it. Now, halacha yud. Yes, there are certain things that Bachlal not mentioned in Torah Shebal Peh. However, the Seifrim have instituted or have became widespread custom. The Kabbalah B'Yadam never received this tradition, ish man for man, all the way tracing back to many generations. That there shouldn't be less than 48 lines in a column, and there shouldn't be more than 60. It's Kabbalah. V'shir revach being parsha parsha, and being called parsha teisha oisis. There should be a revach between each parsha of teisha oisis. For example, between, let's say, parsha psucha and parsha stuma. We'll discuss this tomorrow's Rambam, which is the size of writing the word asher 3 times. Asher, asher, asher. V'shir bereisha shitim l'mayla. Now, there should be 5 shuras above Shiras Hayam, which is Az Yashir. You should have 5 shuras above from the beginning of the column, and he describes what the 5 shuras should be. Beroish Hashitin, Lamaila, it should be 5. Mishiras Hayam Haboim. There should be Haboim, Bayabasha, Hashem, Mace. And B'Mitzrayim. Mishiras Hayam, Haboim, Bayabasha, Hashem, Mace, B'Mitzrayim. These are 5 shuras. Ulamata, and after the Shiras Hayam concludes, also 5. Ulamata. It's vatikach. You start the word line with a vatikach. Sus vayetzu vayavoyu. Now that's one Kabbalah that they had. Another Kabbalah was above the song of Azinu. They had 6 shuras that started as follows: Ba'ida acharei haderech b'achrisa lahach isai and kahal, and sheishitin below the song. They had also 6 lines. Complete lines, because the shira wasn't complete lines, as we'll describe how the shiras were written differently. As Yasha is written in one way, and shiras and Hazin is written in a different way. I'll show you a picture when the Rambam will discuss it. But the lines above and below, so above and below the shiras Hazin, there should be 6 shitin above, ulamatim Menachem, and below the shira should be 5, which begin with the words Vayavar, L'daber, Asher, Hazois, and Asher. Sorry. These are, as we said, a tradition that is the best way to do the writing. However, if you changed it, you have not ruined it. If you wrote a word that's meant to be mali, you wrote it chaser mali, or the kos of kikriyasa. There are some words that they're written in one way and they're meant to be written in a different way, right? So keep going. For example, he shekasav ishkavena b'mkoim yishgalena, right? It says when Misha bana bayis loichanachai. So there it says Misha iras isha. I think it's over there. Loishkavena, and that's the way you're supposed to read. But the way it's written is yishgalena. He wrote the way it's meant to be written. He wrote written. He wrote yishkavena. Or ubatchoirim. He wrote ubatchoirim instead of mekoim ba'afoilim. meant to be written Batchoirim. It's meant to be written Ba'afoilim. He wrote, and just read Batchoirim. The Cheitzben, Oishakasa Parsha Stuma, Psucha, he wrote Stuma, Psucha, Oishakasa Ashirik, Shark Sab. As I started mentioning, the Shira is meant to be written different, and he wrote it like all the rest of them, straight with the margins, the alignment, mamish, like a regular paragraph. He took a regular parsha in Torah and wrote it like the Shira, which means he left indent. He left indents empty, so 2, 1, 2, and then left on the side and wrote in the middle like blocks. But he did it by a regular parsha. Raise it possible, in which case it has all the words, and therefore it doesn't have the kedusha of Sefer Torah. Rather, like any chumash that you teach children from, which also has kedusha of Sfarim, but it's a sefer. It's not a Sefer Torah. Halacha Yud Beis, Sefer Torah Sheni Mugar. Now, there is a prohibition to hold a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah is written properly with 2 atzechaim and has rolled from both sides, not like a Sefer that we have, a Sefer book, or in those days it would be written like a scroll rolled on one side and maybe slightly different. So a Sefer Torah, you're not allowed to keep it in your house unchecked and not proper. Also, you're not allowed to keep it in your house more than 30 days. Either you fix it after 30 days or you put it in shameless. Now, say where sholish Torahs b'chol daf v'daf. If every column has 3 mistakes, you could still fix it. Arba, the second, every line has 4 mistakes and could be over time. It pushed cracked off letters. If you have 4, at that point, you should put it in Gniza. What happens if you have the majority of the Sefer Torah is Mugya? Bashar, in the minority of the Sefer Torah, you have Arba Torahs b'chol daf. You have 4 mistakes on every daf, but it's only in a specific area in Torah. It's not the majority. In that case, even if you have one daf from the rest that doesn't have 4 mistakes, then yitaken, you should fix it. So just Sefer Torah should be fixed. Yeah. And the shaila is what the Rambam means by roiv. If one daf is shalom, then you should fix that whole Sefer Torah. So Ragged Shavar discussed if it's roiv the ois or roiv something else. Okay. Halacha Yud Gimel. In which case do we say you should fix? If you wrote, for example, you wrote hamale, you wrote a word that was meant to be with an additional yud, let's say chirigadol, you wrote it without the yud. In which case, you wrote it less, you're missing it. So you can add those letters between the shittis, and that's what we're talking about. That if you have 4 mistakes in every daf, you should be going. If you wrote the chaser, you wrote a word that was supposed to have without a chaylam vav. It was just what's it called? Shuruk. And you wrote it male. In that case, even if you have more than 4 mistakes, it's not a big deal, because if you scrape it off and you make a different letter longer, you make it look one word, it's not going to look like a Mishka Babel, that whole page, because you can make the word look regular. You don't have to add letters on top, because it's not like you wrote the chaser. It's not like you missed a letter and now you have to add. Forget over here, you need to just erase and stretch the letters near it. In that case, you could fix it. Doesn't matter how many mistakes there are. You have many mistakes. You can fix it. In your case, you just have to scrape it off. You're not adding letters and are hanging out of the shores and make it look weird. You could write a Torah, each, not parshias, but each sefer on its own, and it doesn't have to Sefer Torah, but it has a sefer chumash that kids learn with. Parshias. You can't write like a scroll that has just specific parshias. And you don't write a Megillah for a child to learn from. Exactly. However, that means you don't write some parishes unless you're the middle of writing a Sefer Torah and you give it to a child till you write the next parsha, you're giving it to a child to use this one. That's okay. But you can't write the Megillah for a child just with one parsha. It doesn't work. Now, because the Megillah is shalosh tevis b'shita achas mutar. If you wrote a Megillah with 3 tevis, only 3 words in a column in each shura, that means that's how the column looks. It's mutar, but you can't. Yeah, because you could write shalosh tevis, but you shouldn't write more than that because we're afraid that you're going to write a whole pasuk b'fnei atzmai that could be taken on its own. We don't want it out of context. And b'meila, you should write it for keret, smaller than a Sefer Torah if you're writing a chumash. Now, halacha tezvav mutar l'dabek Torah nevi'im uksuvim b'kerech echad. You could decide to put Torah nevi'im uksuvim in one roll. And between each chumash you should leave 4 shittin as the din. However, bein navi l'navi shalosh shittin has to be less than a Torah. Or bein navi v'navi mishneim asar shalosh shittin. Between each one of the trei asar, which is one sefer we call trei asar, there's 12 nevi'im in one sefer. Then she'im balach techoitech. So you just leave 3 shuras. So if you want, you could separate it afterwards. Siduron shel nevi'im kachu. The order of the nevi'im is the following. Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Melachim, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, Yeshaya, Utreyasa. The Treyasa are the 12 that we just referred to. And now that's Nevi'im. Seder Ksuvim is Rus, Tilim, Eiv, Mishle, Kohelas, Shirashirim, Kinois, with Daniel, Megillah, Ezra, and Debrayah. Now, Kol Kisvei HaKodesh, Ein Kodesh El B'Sirtut. All Kisvei HaKodesh, even that means Ksuvim, also they need Sirtut. Afilu Ksaman Al Nyar, even if you're writing it on paper, not on kosher cloth. Up to 3 words you're allowed to write without scrape in advance. However, if you have this roll, even if it may seem like a Sefer Torah, but you put it together with Torah Nevi'im Uksuvim, it's not the kedusha of a Sefer Torah. It has a kedusha like a Sefer. So ein kedusha has a kedusha Sefer Torah. Ella kechumash min hachomashim kedin. Why? Because din hayaser kedin hachaser. Din with something that has more than you're meant to have. It's as if it has less than you're meant to have. And we have concluded the 7th Perek, the Perek of Shabbos. Thank you so much for being with us. Entire special Chabura going through Kol HaTorah Kula live with the Rambam in our lead, 1 Perek a day. Looking forward to next year where we're going to go through the Psuchos and the Stumas of the entire Torah. Good evening.